So recently I got a comment accusing me of being a little too invested in playing video games, since I mentioned the angling of armor in reference to the penetration values of a gun in the Marder III video. Note that armor angling is the activity of turning the tank or its turret in a way to create an angle towards the enemy that increases the effective armor of one's tank toward that particular enemy. Nowadays it is practiced mostly by gamers, but the question is, was this always the case? So is armor angling an activity invented by gamers, or was it actually used by tankers in World War II and later? I think the comment is quite interesting, since in some regards it is wrong, yet in some ways he has a point. So here's the quote. One sign that a person is a little too invested in playing video games is when in a serious analysis of a real armored vehicle the phrase "if the armor is properly angled" crops up. Real tankers don't worry about that, other than having an imaginary this side toward the enemy sign on the frontal armor. They are a lot more concerned with finding the enemy and getting the first shot off. And real tanks don't instantly respond to keyboard movement commands. So first off, this was on a German World War II vehicle, so let us look at what the Germans noted in their documents about tank angling. Well, in the Tigerfibel, the Tiger Primer, there were 2 full pages dedicated on the concept of effective armor and angling. The whole aspect is even illustrated visually with sausages. I guess it's harder to get more German than those pages. Let's see what they wrote. Your tank is at the gun mantlet 12 cm, at the front 10 cm and 8 cm thick at the sides and back. No one has ever had that. But you can make it much thicker yourself. Now here comes the sausage part. If Mother cuts the sausage vertically, then that gives a slice of sausage exactly as wide as the sausage is thick. But if she cuts it at an angle, the slice of sausage will be twice as wide. While the primer mentions sausages, mothers and pin-up drawings as well, I guess from a cultural aspect this publication was clearly ahead of its time. But back to angling. If you have your tank shot at vertically, meaning perpendicular, it is 10 cm thick and can withstand all calibers up to 7.5 cm. But if you stand with a corner facing the enemy and let yourself be shot at an angle, then it is 13 cm thick. A shot that hits at an angle, however, penetrates much less than one that hits vertically. They also added 2 illustrations that showed 2 clock faces with the armor strength and the effective armor accounting also for the angle of the shot. Noting, you see already when you turn your tank from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, it becomes 2 cm thicker. To make the clock face values easier to remember, they noted the strongest values were values on the clock that corresponded with meal times: breakfast, lunch, coffee break and dinner. This is followed by instructions for the driver, gunner and commander of the tanks. For instance, for the commander it is noted: approach dangerous enemy at an angle, order position over corner, so enemy is in direction of meal times. But I found even more, namely in a pamphlet from June 1st, 1941 about engaging heavy British tanks. Be aware that in the title of the pamphlet they are called English, not British tanks. It is important to note that this was a pamphlet series with at least 5 issues. The issue I will be quoting from is for anti-aircraft guns. So it might seem a bit odd that there is a mention of angling one's tank. Well, the reason for this is very likely that there was also an issue for tanks and that the general information in the beginning of the pamphlet was exactly the same for each arm. To quote, combat positions of friendly armored vehicles. The combat position is most favorable when the front and side of the armored vehicle come at an acute angle to the direction of the enemy's firing. Thus in this case your own fire would take place approximately over the left or right front corner of the friendly armored vehicle. Additionally, I also found something for the Soviets, but in this case it is a bit less solid. Although it is from a wartime source, this one is from the US Tactical Trends from January 1943. They had a section on Soviet tank tactics against German tanks, and just like the Germans, they did not call them Soviets, but Russians. The article starts with: The following report is a literal translation of a portion of a Russian publication concerning the most effective methods of fire against German tanks. The section about the best way to destroy enemy tanks contains the following part. For the successful conduct of fire against enemy tanks, we should proceed as follows. First, while conducting fire against enemy tanks and while maneuvering on the battlefield, our tanks should seek cover in partially defiled positions. Second, in order to decrease the angle of impact of enemy shells, thereby decreasing their power of penetration, we should try to place our tanks at an angle to the enemy. So again, we have a clear mention of angling the armor by the crew of the tank. Finally, I looked a bit into American field manuals as well, but I could not find anything. So I asked George from World War II Armor, whom I interviewed back in 2019 in Conneaut, Ohio. He noted that he can't remember reading about angling of tanks in any US field and technical manuals of the Second World War. Anyway, I think we can be rather certain that angling your tank was not something that gamers invented. At least the German documentation here seems to be pretty solid. We already have angling mentioned in the pamphlet from the 1st June 1941, so before the Germans had encountered the T-34, which is well known for its sloped armor. Additionally, in the Tiger Fibel from 1943, the whole concept and clear instructions for free crew members are also laid out. Yet there's one more point about the comment, namely the statement, "And real tanks don't instantly respond to keyboard movement commands." That is indeed true, but one should not forget that particularly for World War II, it took quite some time to properly range a shot as well. So to angle a tank properly, it was not always necessary that there was an instant response neither. After all, real tanks don't instantly respond to mouse commands either. So you probably go now, well, didn't you mention that he has a point too? Well, yes, after World War II, he indeed has a point. The issue is he commented on a World War II video. This is a great reminder of what Nicholas Moran, aka the Chieftain, noted in the Myths of American Armor, Tankfest Northwest 2015. So who am I? Why should you care? Well, A, I'm an armor officer. This means nothing. It's one of those things I hate on the internet forums. Quote, I'm an Abrams tanker and I'm telling you that the Sherman in World War II was bad. End quote. What has that got to do with the price of fish? The reason that Chieftain knows his stuff about World War II armor and beyond is due to the fact that he reads a lot and also goes into the archives, not because he serves as a tanker. Anyway, for the Cold War I looked into some regulations, namely the East German handbooks for the medium tank Part 1 and Part 2 from the 1970s. They contained the following entries. Firefight with tanks. During enemy tank attack into the flank, immediately turn bow to the enemy and take up firefight from the short hold or by taking advantage of cover opportunities from the spot. Be aware that turning the frontal armor directly to the enemy is not called angling. Similarly, in the second book, in Driving During Combat, it is noted, detected enemy fire is always to be directed toward the bow in order to protect the sides, which are weaker in armor and larger in dimensions. For the short hold, such terrain sections are to be selected where the armored hull is camouflaged or protected, but fire control and observation are possible. So it seems angling was not really covered in these books, and I should add here, these books were quite extensive. Together they have more than 1000 pages, which is far more extensive than anything I've seen from the Wehrmacht. But what about modern Western armored forces like the Bundeswehr? Sadly, I don't have any books here yet, but I know some people that served as tankers. Although the general concept of angled armor plates is taught, it seems that actively angling the tank in combat is strongly advised against. So this leaves us with the question, what happened? Well, I'm not certain about the following parts, but my educated guess is as follows. First off, to make angling more meaningful, you need a tank that also has a rather strong side armor. This was indeed the case with the German Tiger and the Soviet KV-1 tanks. For a medium tank like the Sherman, this works less, so neither does it work for the German Panther that has a strong frontal armor but rather weak side armor. Cold War tanks transitioned away from heavy tanks over time, although some might argue that main battle tanks are basically heavy tanks that serve as universal tanks. Second, tank gunnery and anti-tank gunnery became more lethal in various ways. Target acquisition was faster, and anti-tank warheads like high-explosive anti-tank, but also armor-piercing discarding sabot, made traditional armor plates far less protective. This also meant that speed and maneuver became more important for protection. This is also related to the third point. Third, in the Second World War, tanks conducted fire mostly from while in position and not while being on the move. As such, angling was an option even for a single tank within a formation. In the Cold War, firing on the move became a real option. Now, if you are in a formation moving across the field, you can't just start angling your tank without seriously breaking the formation. To quote from East German regulation, "In combat, the driver is obliged to, during the attack, to keep the direction and maintain the combat formation of the platoon and to ensure favorable conditions for firing. Skillfully exploit the cover characteristics of the terrain, overcome barriers and obstacles or go around them on command, without making large flanking movements, obstructing the neighboring tanks." Finally, it should be added that in that video I did not talk about the activity of angling at all. I talked about the fact that if the tank or better tanks were properly angled, something that can just happen and might not be the result of a deliberate action by the crew. To quote about the penetration capabilities of the Marder III gun, "At 1000 meters the T-34/85 Sherman and Panzer IV were more or less safe if properly angled." To summarize, although some people might think that angling one's armor was invented by people playing World of Tanks and War Thunder, looking at German primary sources from the Second World War, this seems to be not the case. It was indeed recommended in official army publications in both 1941 and 1943. Tank angling in general might not be used anymore due to various reasons. Well, I hope you learned something new. Thank you to Josh from World War II Armor for helping out with information about US forces. Thank you to Alex for his statement about the Bundeswehr tank training. Special thanks to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you to all my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar. As always, sources are listed in the description. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for watching and see you next time.